The gunshot cracked through the morning air like a whip. Glass shattered. A display case exploded into 1,000 glittering pieces on the wooden floor of Mercer's Arms. Somewhere a woman was screaming. Somewhere a man was bleeding. And standing in the middle of it all was a 71-year-old widow named Margaret Sutherland. Her hands were shaking. Her silver hair had come loose from its bun, and in her frail fingers she held a Colt 1911 pistol still smoking. Across the room, a young man in a $2,000 suit clutched his leg and howled. Blood pooled under him on the polished oak. He was the son of a United States congressman. He was also something much, much worse. Kneeling beside him, holding him down with one massive scarred hand, was Silas Mercer, 68 years old. Gulf War Marine, president of the Hells Angels Rocky Mountain chapter. The old biker looked up at Margaret. His eyes were wet, and he nodded at her just once the way soldiers nod when the mission is finally done. Folks, before you judge what you just saw, you need to understand how we got here. Because this didn't start with a gunshot. It started 3 days earlier, with a joke, with a cruel word thrown at a grieving widow by two boys who thought the world was their playground. It started with a small wooden box, a dead husband's last warning, and a promise made 35 years ago that was finally coming due. This is the story of Ironwood, Montana. 3 days earlier, Tuesday morning, Interstate 15, Montana. The engine of a 1998 Harley-Davidson Road King doesn't so much purr as it growls. Low, steady, like a big dog warning you not to come any closer. Silas Mercer had been riding that same bike for 26 years. He'd rebuilt the engine 4 times, replaced the tank twice. The leather on the saddle was cracked and soft as an old glove, and the patch on the back of his worn black vest read in faded white letters. The highway ahead was empty. October in Montana. The cottonwoods along the Yellowstone River had turned golden copper. The sky was that particular kind of blue you only see out west, thin, cold, endless. Silas had just left Denver, a 3-day meeting of chapter presidents. Politics, disagreements, old men arguing over things that didn't matter as much as they used to. He was glad to be going home. Home was Ironwood, Montana. Population 2,411. 1 diner, 1 church, 2 bars, and 1 gun shop his. Mercer's Arms and Ammunition. He'd opened it in 1994, back when his knees still worked without aspirin. Back when his wife Clara was still alive. That was the thing about getting old, Silas thought as the wind pulled at his beard. It wasn't the body giving out that you could take. It was the list of people you couldn't call anymore. The list got longer every year. He glanced at the odometer. 40 miles to Ironwood. And that's when his phone buzzed inside his vest pocket. He pulled off at the next exit, parked under a billboard advertising fishing licenses. Pulled the phone out with a gloved hand. It was a text message from Chad Whitlock, one of the 2 part-timers watching his shop. Boss, everything fine here, just a slow day. Don't worry about anything. Silas read it twice. Then he frowned, because he hadn't asked. He hadn't checked in. He hadn't said a word. He was still 40 miles out, and Chad, a kid who rarely volunteered anything, was sending an unprompted message saying, don't worry about anything. Silas had been in the Marines for 8 years. He'd been running a motorcycle club for 30 more. If there was one thing he'd learned, it was this: when a man tells you there's nothing to worry about before you've even asked, you should probably start worrying. He thumbed a reply. Anyone been in asking for me specifically? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Nope, quiet morning. See you when you get back. Silas put the phone away, kicked the Harley back to life, pulled out onto the highway. But something in his gut, the same something that had saved his life in a sandstorm outside Kuwait City in '91, was twisting slowly, like a screw being tightened. Meanwhile, Mercer's Arms, 10:47 a.m. The shop smelled like gun oil cedar and fresh coffee. It was a good smell, an honest smell, the kind of smell that had been the same for 3 decades. The wooden floors creaked the way old floors are supposed to. Behind the main counter, an American flag hung between 2 mounted elk heads, one shot by Silas in 1987, the other by his daddy in 1962. Chad Whitlock leaned on that counter with his phone in his hand, smirking at something on the screen. He was 30 years old, tall, blonde, handsome in the way rich boys are handsome, all teeth and confidence and nothing underneath. He wore a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up and designer jeans that had never seen a day of actual work. His father was Harlan Whitlock, mayor of Ironwood, currently running for the United States Senate, which was the only reason Silas Mercer had ever hired Chad in the first place. Harlan was an old friend. Harlan had asked Silas, "My boy needs to learn humility, Needs to learn what real work looks like, put him behind a counter for a few months, and Silas, against his better judgment, had said yes. That was 3 months ago. Chad had not learned humility. Across the shop by the ammo shelves, Ricky Abernathy was quietly restocking boxes of .308 Winchester. Ricky was 27, skinny, red-haired, nervous. He'd grown up in a trailer park outside Billings, and he'd been working at Mercer's for 2 years, the longest job he'd ever held. Ricky did not like Chad, but Ricky needed the paycheck. So Ricky kept his mouth shut. The bell above the door jingled. An old man walked in, mid-70s, navy field jacket, a tremor in his left hand, the kind you get from decades-old shrapnel, or from a stroke, or from just being alive too long in a hard world. "Mornin', fellas," the old man said. "Looking for some .22 long rifle. For squirrels. Got 'em eating the insulation off my shed wires again." Ricky straightened up, smiled. "Yes, sir, right over here. We've got a few brands on sale." "Actually," Chad cut in, not looking up from his phone, "we're kind of low on .22 right now. Might want to try the Walmart up in Livingston." Ricky blinked. They had 4 full boxes of .22 long rifle. Right there, on the shelf. Chad could see them from where he was standing. The old man's mouth twitched. He looked from Chad to Ricky, then at the shelves where the boxes were clearly labeled, then back at Chad, then he tipped his hat. Quiet, dignified. "Well," he said, "reckon I'll head on up the road then. Y'all have a nice day." He walked out. The bell jingled, the door shut. Ricky stared at Chad. "Dude, what the hell?" Chad finally looked up, smirked. What old guy's hands were shaking? "You want him dropping a box of ammo on my foot? Let him be somebody else's problem. He's a customer. He's a relic." Ricky opened his mouth, closed it, went back to stocking shelves. That's when Chad bent down behind the counter, made sure Ricky wasn't looking, and he pulled out something wrapped in an old shop rag. It was a Glock 19, brand new, serial number filed off. Chad tucked it back under the counter under a loose floorboard Silas had never bothered to fix. He'd been hiding it there for 6 days. His pulse kicked up just a little. He liked that feeling. Then the bell jingled again, and an old woman walked in. She was small. That was the first thing you noticed. She couldn't have been more than 5'2", and she walked with the careful placed step motion of a woman whose knees had been negotiating with her for a long time. She wore a gray wool coat, buttoned up to the collar even though the shop was warm, a black scarf around her neck, silver hair pulled back into a neat low bun, no jewelry except for a thin gold wedding band on her left hand and a small cross on a chain around her neck. Her eyes were what made you stop. They were pale blue, clear, and tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She carried a wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, dark walnut with a tiny brass keyhole on the front. It looked old. It looked cared for. She held it against her chest the way a mother holds a sleeping baby. She walked up to the counter, stopped, set the box down gently on the glass. Chad looked her up and down, and he smiled. That rich boy smile, the one that never touched his eyes. "Can I help you, ma'am? I'd like to speak with Silas Mercer, please," she said. Her voice was soft but steady. "The boss ain't here right now. When will he be back?" "Hard to say." She nodded slowly, looked down at her hands on the poem, then back up at him. "It's very important that I speak with him. My name is Margaret Sutherland. I'm the widow of Ambrose Sutherland. If you could just call Mr. Mercer and tell him I'm here, I'd be grateful." Chad leaned back, crossed his arms. His smile got wider. Behind him by the ammo shelves, Ricky Abernathy went very still. "Ambrose Sutherland," Chad repeated like it was a punchline. "That's a name." "Yes, it was. And you came all the way down to a gun shop to... What exactly you buying something? I need to speak to Mr. Mercer." "You buying something, though?" Margaret hesitated. Then she said very quietly, "Yes, I believe I am." Chad laughed, sharp, mean. "Lady, look around you. This ain't a toy store, bitch. Go home and knit something." The words hit the air and just hung there. Ricky's whole body locked up. You could have heard a spent shell casing drop. Margaret's face didn't change. Not a flicker. She just looked at Chad, really looked at him the way a school teacher might look at a student who just said something so stupid she didn't even know where to begin. And she said, "Young man, may I give you some advice?" Chad rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go. You remind me of someone." "Yeah, who's that? Your dead husband?" Margaret's jaw tightened. Just a fraction. You'd have missed it if you blinked. "No," she said. A boy I knew in 1977. He also believed he was untouchable. He used to say the most terrible things to his mother. His mother was my best friend. Cool story. He was found in a ditch outside Great Falls 3 years later. Drunk. Beaten to death by men whose names he'd never bothered to learn. The shop got very quiet. Chad's smile faltered, just for a second. Then he snapped his fingers loud in Margaret's face. Hey, focus. This ain't story hour. Either buy something or walk. We're busy. The shop was empty. Margaret looked around, at the empty shop, and something in her shoulders sagged just a little, just for a moment, and then she straightened back up. She put one hand on top of the wooden box, almost protectively, and she said under her breath, too low for Chad to hear, but loud enough for Ricky to catch, Amos, I tried it your way. Now I'm gonna have to do it mine. Ricky felt a chill crawl up the back of his neck. Chad whipped out his phone, held it up. Hey, Ricky, check this out. Look at her still standing there. Classic. I'm putting this on the group chat. Click, the phone camera flash went off in Margaret's face. She flinched. And that's when the bell above the door jingled for the third time that morning. The man who walked in was 73 years old. He was tall, broad in the shoulders, narrow in the hips even at his age. His face was carved like a piece of old cedar lined weathered hard. He wore a sheepskin coat, a brown Stetson, and under the coat on his belt, he still wore the leather holster he'd worn every day for 31 years, back when he'd been sheriff of Beaverhead County. Walter Kovac, retired lawman, friend of Silas Mercer's going back 40 years, and a man who had heard from a friend of a friend that an old woman was asking around about Silas over at Mercer's Arms. He'd driven straight over. He stepped into the shop, took off his hat, started to say something pleasant, and then he saw her. Walt Kovac went white as a sheet. Margaret, he whispered. Margaret Sutherland. Dear Lord, is that you? Margaret turned to look at him, and for the first time since she'd walked into that shop, her eyes softened. Hello, Walter. I heard about Amos. I'm so sorry, honey. I sent flowers. I couldn't make the service. I had my hip done that week. I got the flowers. They were beautiful. Thank you. Walt came over slowly. He put his hat down on the counter. He took her small hands in his big rough ones. What are you doing in Ironwood, darling? I came to see Silas. Silas is in Denver. I know, I'm going to wait. Walt studied her face. Something passed across his own, something complicated, something that looked almost like fear. Then he slowly turned his head and looked at Chad Whitlock. Boy, Walt said, his voice had gone flat. You've been taking care of this lady, Chad shrugged. I told her the boss wasn't here, she won't leave. Walt's jaw worked. Did I hear you call her a bitch a minute ago from the parking lot? Chad's face went pink. Look, old-timer, mind your business. Walt moved. For a man of 73 with a new hip, he moved fast. He stepped around the counter, grabbed Chad Whitlock by the collar of his button-down shirt, and slammed him not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to make the point against the pegboard wall behind the register. Boxes of .45 ACP ammunition rattled. Listen to me, you entitled little pissant, Walt hissed inches from Chad's face. You have no goddamn idea who this woman is. You have no idea who her husband was. You have no idea what is going to happen to you if Silas Mercer hears about what just came out of your mouth. Get off me. Her husband, boy. Her husband. You ever heard of Detective Ambrose Sutherland, Ironwood PD, 28 years, retired in 2014? The man who broke the Crown Ridge trafficking case. The man whose photograph hangs in the goddamn state capitol. Chad's eyes darted. I don't... That's his widow. Walt let go, stepped back. Chad slumped against the wall, pale. Margaret had not moved this entire time. She just stood there with her hands resting gently on top of the wooden box. Walt turned back to her, took a breath, gathered himself. Margaret, honey, why don't you come have a cup of coffee with me? The iron skillet's just down the block. We'll wait for Silas together. I'd rather wait here, Walter. Thank you. Margaret, I'd rather wait here. The way she said it, soft but absolute, Walt understood. He nodded slowly. He picked his hat back up off the counter. Then he pulled out his phone, walked to the front window, and made a call. He did not call Silas. Ricky Abernathy, watching all of this from the ammo shelf, felt the chill on the back of his neck get colder. Because when Walt Kovac finally spoke into the phone, he kept his voice so low Ricky could only catch two words. Two words that didn't match the situation at all. The words were, she knows. Walt finished his call, slipped the phone back into his coat, walked back to the counter. Margaret, he said gently, I'm going to step out for just a minute. Personal errand. I'll be right back. You hear me? Right back. Don't you go anywhere. I won't. He looked at Chad. Boy, you so much as speak her name again and I'll hear about it. You understand me? Chad nodded mutely. Walt left. The bell jingled. Margaret moved to a small wooden bench by the front window, sat down, placed the wooden box on her lap, folded her hands over it, and closed her eyes. She looked just for a moment like a woman at church. Ricky slipped out from behind the ammo shelf, made a show of going to the front door. Gonna go empty the trash out back, he told Chad. Chad didn't even look up. He was on his phone furiously texting somebody. Ricky stepped outside. The cold air slapped him, and he pulled out his own phone. He scrolled to a name he had never called before, a name Silas had written down on a card and handed to him 2 years ago on his first day. If something's wrong and you can't reach me and it's bad, call this. Ricky had never called it. He called it now. A voice answered on the second ring, a man's voice, older, hard. Yeah. Is this Eli? Who's asking? Ricky Abernathy from Mercer's Arms. Silas told me to call you if something was really wrong. And I think something's really wrong. A pause. Talk. Ricky talked. About the old woman. About Chad calling her a bitch. About Walt showing up and almost losing his mind. About the phone call Walt just made. About the words she knows. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Eli said, son, you stay in that shop. You lock that door if you have to. You do not let her leave. You understand me? Yeah, yes, why? Because I think you just met the widow of the best damn cop this state ever had. And I think the wrong people are about to find out she's back in Ironwood. The line went dead. Ricky stood there in the cold, blinking at his phone. Behind him through the shop window, he could see Margaret Sutherland sitting on the bench, hands folded over the wooden box, eyes closed, like she was praying. And for the first time in his life, Ricky Abernathy Trailer Park, kid, high school dropout, gun shop part-timer, understood that he was standing inside a story that was much, much bigger than him. He went back inside. 40 minutes later, 12:06 p.m., Margaret had not moved. Chad had stopped texting. He was sitting on a stool behind the counter, now his phone face down beside him, staring at nothing. Some of the color had come back to his face, but only some. Ricky stood near the front, pretending to clean the glass of a display case with a rag. Really, he was watching the parking lot through the window, watching the road, watching. And then he heard it, that sound, that low rolling thunderous growl that every man and woman in Ironwood, Montana knew on sight. A 1998 Harley-Davidson Road King Big Bore custom pipes coming down Main Street at 35 miles an hour. Ricky exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. Silas was home. The Harley pulled into the gravel lot. Dust rose. The engine shut off, and for a moment the only sound was the tick-tick-tick of cooling metal. Silas Mercer swung his leg off the bike. Tall, heavy-shouldered, gray beard, gray ponytail. A face that had seen 2 wars, one in the desert, one in the slow grinding decades after. His leather vest creaked as he moved. He took off his gloves, tucked them in his back pocket, started toward the door. Then he stopped. Because through the front window of his own gun shop, he could see a small, gray-haired woman sitting on the bench, holding a wooden box. Silas Mercer had been a hard man his whole life. He had not cried at his own father's funeral. He had not cried when Clara died. He had wept, yes, privately in the garage into a shop rag, but he had not cried. Standing there in the parking lot of Mercer's Arms on a Tuesday morning in October 2024, Silas Mercer felt something break inside his chest. Because he knew that woman. He had not seen her in 19 years, not since Amos's retirement party, and before that only at Christmases and birthdays and one terrible hospital waiting room in 1997 when her second child had nearly died of meningitis. But he knew her, and if Maggie Sutherland was sitting on a bench in his gun shop holding a wooden box with that look on her face, then Amos was dead. Not sick, not hurt. Dead. And something else. Something worse. Because Amos Sutherland had been the most paranoid, careful, prepared man Silas had ever known. Amos had a file in a safe deposit box in 3 different banks in 3 different states. Amos had once told Silas over whiskey on a porch in the summer of 2009, if I go out natural side, you won't hear from Maggie. She'll be fine. She'll call the kids. She'll cry at the funeral. She'll plant tomatoes next spring. But if I go out wrong, if somebody puts me down, then one day she'll show up on your doorstep with a little wooden box. And when that happens, old friend, God help us all, because it means they're coming for her too. Silas had laughed at him that night. He wasn't laughing now. He walked up to the front door of his own shop, pushed it open. The bell jingled. Margaret opened her eyes. She saw him, and her face, the face that had stayed so composed, so unreadable through every cruel word Chad Whitlock had thrown at her for the last hour and 20 minutes, her face finally broke. "Silas," she whispered. She stood up. The wooden box slipped in her hands and she caught it against her chest. "Silas, he's gone. Amos is gone. And Silas," she was crying now, silent tears running down the lines of her face. "They killed him, Silas. They killed my husband, and now they're coming for me." Silas Mercer took 3 long strides across the floor of his gun shop. He didn't say a word. He just opened his arms. And Margaret Sutherland, 71 years old, 4 feet away from the counter where a spoiled rich boy had called her a bitch, not 90 minutes before walked into those arms and wept into the leather of his vest. Over her shoulder, slowly, Silas Mercer turned his head. His eyes found Chad Whitlock. And for the first time in 30 years, the air in Mercer's arms and ammunition went cold. Chad Whitlock had grown up the son of a mayor. He had never in his 30 years of life been afraid of another human being. Until that moment. Silas did not speak. He did not raise his voice. He did not even let go of Margaret. He just looked. And in that look was 30 years of the United States Marine Corps. 30 more years of running a 1% motorcycle club. 30 more years of watching punks come and go, rise and fall, and always eventually pay for what they'd done. Silas Mercer finally said very softly into Margaret's silver hair, "Maggie, you're safe now. I swear to Christ you are safe now." Then still softly but aimed like a rifle across the room, "Son, whatever you just did, you are about to find out what kind of mistake you made." Outside, somewhere down Main Street, the sound of a second Harley engine started up, then a third, then a fourth. Walt Kovac's phone call had reached more than one person. And somewhere in a black Cadillac Escalade 26 miles away, Chad Whitlock's real employer, the man who had paid him to watch that shop, to wait for that widow to photograph that box, was also getting a phone call. "She's here," a voice said. "And Mercer just walked in." A long silence, then "Send the team, tonight." The line went dead. And the clock, the one nobody in Mercer's arms could see yet, started ticking. 48 hours. The hug lasted a long time. Long enough that Chad Whitlock shifted his weight behind the counter and cleared his throat, and immediately regretted it when Silas Mercer's eyes cut back to him like a searchlight. Silas did not speak to Chad yet. He held Margaret at arm's length, looked at her face, really looked. The way you look at someone you love when you haven't seen them in a long time, and you're trying to count how many of the lines are new. "Come sit down, Maggie," he said. His voice was low. "Come on, in the back. There's a kettle on." She nodded. She kept the wooden box pressed against her ribs with both hands, like somebody might try to take it from her. Silas guided her gently, one big scarred hand resting on her shoulder, across the shop floor. Past the glass cases, past the rifles on the wall, toward the little hallway at the back that led to his office. He stopped once. He stopped right in front of Chad. He did not raise his voice. Didn't need to. "Son," Silas said quietly, "did you call this woman a bitch?" Chad's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Answer me." I didn't know who she was, boss. I swear to God I didn't." "That's not what I asked." Silence. The kind of silence where the second hand of the wall clock sounds like somebody snapping a branch. Yes, sir, I said that." Silas nodded slowly, like he'd confirmed something he'd already been sure of. "Stay where you are," he said. "Don't touch the register. Don't touch the phone. Don't touch your phone. Don't move. If I come out of that office and you're not standing exactly where you're standing right now, you and I are going to have a very short conversation with a very long shadow. You understand me?" Chad nodded. "Use your words, son." "Yes, sir, I understand." Silas looked at Ricky. "You lock the front door, flip the sign to closed, then you come to the office." "Yes, sir." Silas walked Margaret down the hallway. Behind him through the shop, Ricky's shaking fingers turned the lock on the front door. The deadbolt made a heavy final sound. Thunk. And Chad Whitlock, son of a United States Senate candidate, 30 years old, never afraid of anything in his life, stood very still behind the counter and realized for the first time that his phone was still sitting face down beside him, and that if it buzzed right now with a message from his real employer, he might not survive the afternoon. Silas's office was small. A metal desk, 2 folding chairs, a calendar from an ammunition distributor still turned to September. A framed photograph of his late wife Clara holding a striped bass she'd caught in 1996. A single window that looked out onto the alley and a dumpster. It smelled like coffee and gun solvent. Silas pulled out a chair for Margaret. She sat. He put a kettle on the little hot plate in the corner, didn't say anything, let the quiet do its work. Ricky came in and stood awkwardly by the door. Walt Kovac had not come back yet. Silas had noticed that. He didn't say anything about it. Yet. Maggie, he said once she'd taken a swallow of tea, take your time. Start wherever you need to start. Margaret set the wooden box on the metal desk between them. She smoothed her skirt with both hands. She looked at by the way a priest looks at a Bible. Then she began. Amos died on August 14th, she said, 10 weeks ago. Silas's face did not move, but something in his eyes went hard and still. The coroner ruled it a stroke. He was 69. He had high blood pressure. He'd been on medication for 11 years. Nobody questioned it. I didn't question it. I buried him, Silas. I buried my husband. She took a breath. 3 weeks after the funeral, I was cleaning out his workshop. You know how Amos was. Every tool had a hook. Every hook had a label. I was putting his socket wrenches in a box to give to our son-in-law, and I found this. She turned the wooden box toward him, unlocked it with a small brass key she pulled from a chain around her neck. The lid opened. Inside, on a bed of blue velvet, were 4 things. A folded letter yellowed at the edges, a set of military dog tags, a small brass key smaller than the one she'd used to open the box, and a single photograph, black and white, creased old, of 2 young men in their 20s, arms around each other's shoulders, standing in front of a bank in 1989. Both of them grinning. One of them was unmistakably Silas Mercer. The other was a lean, dark-haired young man with a long scar along his jawline. Ambrose Sutherland. Silas picked up the photograph. He held it in both hands, and for a long moment he did not say anything. I didn't know he kept this, he said finally. He kept everything that mattered, Margaret said. Silas set the photograph down, picked up the folded letter, looked at Margaret. May I buy? That's why I'm here. He opened it, read it. His lips moved very slightly with some of the words. His jaw worked once, twice. Then he read it out loud quietly so Ricky could hear too. Maggie, if you're reading this, then they finally got to me. I'm sorry, honey. I tried so hard to make it to old age with you. Listen, do not go to Ironwood PD. Do not go to the county sheriff. Do not trust Walt Kovac. I love him like a brother, but he made a deal with someone a long time ago, and I could never prove it. Do not trust anyone with a badge in this town. There is one man and only one man who will protect you. His name is Silas Mercer. Go to him. Give him this box. The key opens a safe deposit box at Stockman's Bank in Bozeman under the name Theodore Finch. Inside that box is everything: names, dates, photographs, bank records. I love you more than my own life. Tell the kids I was proud of them every single day, eh? Silas set the letter down. The kettle on the hot plate began to whistle. Nobody moved to take it off. Maggie, Silas said, and what's in the safe deposit box? I don't know. I haven't been to Bozeman. I was afraid to go alone. Amos wrote they finally got to me. Who's they? Margaret closed her eyes for a moment. Silas, you know what Amos was working on when he retired. Everybody in this town knows. The women. Yes. The kettle kept whistling. The sound was starting to hurt. 4 of them, Margaret said, between 2016 and 2019. Lucinda Brevard, Paula Holbrook, Darlene McAdoo, Rosalind Tisdale. All of them adults. All of them single. All of them found in ways that looked just close enough to suicide or accident. Amos never believed it. Not for 1 second. He used his own time, his own money. He built a file, Silas, a file 2 inches thick, and he told me on more than one night over that kitchen table, he told me he knew who did it. He just couldn't prove it. Silas finally got up, took the screaming kettle off the hot plate. The silence that followed felt enormous. Did he ever tell you the name Maggie? No, he said knowing would put me in danger. Silas looked at the letter again, at the line his name is written on the last page of the file in the box. He looked at the small brass safe deposit key. He looked at Ricky, who was standing very still by the door listening to every word. Then Silas Mercer made a decision. Maggie, he said, we're going to Bozeman tonight. But first I need to know something. You said in the shop you said they're coming for me. How do you know that? Margaret pulled her coat a little tighter around her shoulders. Because 3 weeks ago, somebody broke into my house while I was at the grocery store and went through Amos's workshop. They didn't take anything of value, I mean. They took his tool labels, his little printed tool labels off the pegboard. That's how they searched. They were looking for something hidden behind a tool. And, and last Tuesday, I nearly had a car accident on Highway 90. My brake line was leaking. My neighbor Earl's a mechanic. He's been Earl for 40 years. He said somebody had scored it with a knife. She opened her eyes, looked straight at Silas. I am not a brave woman, Silas. I was never a brave woman. Amos was the brave one, but I am a stubborn one. And if they want this box, they are going to have to take it off my body. Silas stared at her for a long moment. Then he reached across the desk and put one enormous scarred hand gently over both of hers. Maggie, he said, they are not going to take it off your body. Not today, not any day. Silas stood up. Ricky, he said, go check on our friend at the counter. Ricky nodded and slipped out of the office. 30 seconds later, he was back, face pale. He's gone, boss. Silas turned. Gone. Front door still locked. He went out the back, through the stockroom. He's gone. Silas pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose. Then he walked fast down the hall through the stockroom. The back door was unlocked. The alley behind the shop was empty except for his own pickup in the dumpster. Chad Whitlock's little red Audi, which had been parked in employee parking since 7 that morning, was not there. Son of a bitch, Silas muttered. He came back inside, locked the back door, walked to the shop floor, walked straight to the counter where Chad had been sitting. He flipped over the stool, ran his hand along the underside of the counter. Nothing. He crouched down. The years complained. He ignored them. And then with the edge of his thumbnail, he pried up the loose floorboard he'd been meaning to fix for 11 years. The Glock 19 lay there wrapped in a shop rag serial number filed off. Silas stared at it. Then he stood up slowly, knees popping, and walked back to the office. Maggie, he said, that boy who called you a bitch, I need you to listen to me very carefully. That boy was not working for me, not really. He was working for somebody else. He was put in my shop, and I just found an unregistered handgun hidden behind my counter with the serial number filed off. Margaret's face had gone the color of ash, which means, Silas went on, that if something had happened in this shop, if you, for instance, had been found dead on the floor, that gun would have shown up in my hand, and it would have had my prints on it, because it was wrapped in one of my own shop rags. Oh my God. They were going to kill you here, today, and they were going to put me away for it. Silas turned to Ricky. Son, I need you to tell me everything you know about Chad Whitlock. Ricky opened his mouth. And that's when Ricky's phone rang. He pulled it out, looked at the screen, handed it to Silas without a word. The caller ID said Eli. Silas put it to his ear. Yeah. He listened. His face did not change. He listened for 56 seconds. Then he said, I understand. Keep them at a distance until we're clear. Don't engage. We're going to the bank. He hung up, handed the phone back to Ricky. He turned to Margaret. 2 vehicles just rolled into Ironwood, he said. Black Escalades, 4 men each. They're parked at the diner right now eating pie. They are the reason your husband is dead, Maggie. They've been here in town for 3 hours. They were waiting for somebody to tell them you were in this shop. And somebody just did. Silas moved fast now. He opened the safe behind his desk, pulled out a holstered Sig Sauer P226, clipped it to his belt under his vest, pulled out a second smaller revolver, a snub-nosed Smith & Wesson, and turned to Margaret. Have you ever fired a handgun, Maggie? Amos taught me, a long time ago. He made me practice once a year. Are you steady? I haven't shot in 9 years. Are you steady? She thought about it, honestly. I'm steady enough. Good. He handed her the revolver butt first. This is a 5-shot. Point and pull. Don't think about it. If somebody's in your way and you don't know them, you point and pull. You understand? Yes. Silas turned to Ricky. Son, I need to know right now before we walk out of this office whose side you are on. Because if you called somebody else while you were outside taking out the trash, if you did that, and I don't find out about it until later, I will be real disappointed. And you do not want to disappoint me this afternoon. Ricky's voice shook. I called Eli. That's all I called. Silas, I swear to God on my mother's grave, Chad is a piece of shit and I never liked him and I didn't know any of this. Silas stared at him, then he nodded. Okay, you ride with us. You keep your eyes open. You do what I tell you. Yes, sir. Silas pulled out his own phone, started making calls. Call 1, a man named Bear. Bear, it's Silas. I need you and 4 of the boys at the shop in 30 minutes. We're moving a package to Bozeman. We're going to have company on the road. Call 2, a man named Doc. Doc, I might need you tonight, the real kind of need. Can you be at my house by 8? Call 3. An FBI agent in Billings. A man Silas had known for 22 years since the day he'd turned in a kilo of cocaine that a prospect had tried to sneak into his club. Hank, I need a face-to-face tomorrow morning. Bring a tape recorder. I've got something for you that is going to ruin a mayor's week. Call 4. He hesitated on this one. He called Walt Kovac. It went to voicemail. Silas held the phone away from his ear for a second, looked at it. Then he said very calmly to the voicemail, Walt, it's Silas. Margaret's with me. We're heading to Bozeman in 20 minutes. If you want to ride along, meet us at the shop. If you don't show, I'll assume you had other business. Call me back either way, brother. He hung up. He looked at Margaret and Ricky. All right, he said. We have 48 hours until Mayor Harlan Whitlock kicks off his Senate campaign in front of every news camera in Montana. If that file in Bozeman says what I think it says, we are going to walk into that campaign event and we are going to shut it down. But between now and then, there are 8 men and 2 trucks at the diner who intend to stop us. And there is a son of a bitch named Chad Whitlock who just ran out the back door of my shop. He picked up his keys. Let's move. But before they moved, Silas said something that surprised Ricky. One more thing, son. I need you to check the security camera footage in the stockroom. Go back 3 weeks, and I need you to look for one face in particular. Who's... Silas's jaw worked. Walt Kovac. Ricky blinked. The old sheriff. The guy who was just here. The guy who nearly put Chad through a wall for saying what he said. Yeah, that guy. But boss, he was defending Maggie. Go check the footage, son. Humor me. I've been reading men for 50 years. When Walt walked out of here to make that phone call, he didn't call me. I want to know who he called, and I want to know if he's been in this shop before when he shouldn't have been. Ricky disappeared into the back. Silas turned to Margaret, took her hand for a second. Maggie, you're going to hear something in the next few minutes that might break your heart. Before you hear it, I need you to understand Amos knew, and he wrote it in that letter. Do not trust Walt Kovac. He had his reasons. He always had his reasons. You with me? I'm with you. 2 minutes later, Ricky came back. He was holding a tablet. Boss, you need to see this. He set the tablet on the desk. The footage was grainy black and white time-stamped. The date was 3 weeks earlier. The time was 2:47 a.m. The figure that moved through the shop was unmistakable. Tall, broad-shouldered, the sheepskin coat, the Stetson he never took off. Walt Kovac, in the middle of the night, in a shop that was not his, going through the customer ledger behind the counter, photographing the pages with his phone. Silas stared at the screen. He did not curse. He did not punch the wall. He did not do any of the things a younger man might have done. He just stared. And then very quietly he said, 40 years. I've known him 40 years. Margaret reached across the desk and put her small, papery hand over his. Silas, I'm sorry. Silas exhaled slowly, a long, tired breath that seemed to come from somewhere far older than 68. Maggie, he said, I believe I just lost my best friend, and he ain't even dead yet. They did not go to Bozeman that afternoon. Silas made a fast, cold decision. If 8 men were waiting at the diner, and if Walt Kovac had called them, then Walt knew Silas would head to Bozeman, which meant the road to Bozeman was a trap. Instead, Silas drove in them in his battered F-250 pickup, not his Harley, not this time 16 miles east, into the hills above the Yellowstone River to a small hunting cabin at the end of a dirt road nobody remembered was there. He'd bought it in 1998 under a different name, paid cash, paid property taxes in cash every year since. The cabin was dark green, 1 bedroom, a wood stove, a generator, a well. No phone line, no cell signal until you walked out to the ridge. Silas had brought 4 people here in 26 years. Margaret Sutherland became the 5th. By the time the sun was going down, 2 things had happened. The first was that 3 members of the Rocky Mountain Chapter Bear Doc and a quiet man named Gideon Rook had arrived on their bikes. They parked in the trees. They took up positions. Doc, who had been a combat medic in the Second Gulf War, set up a small clinic on the kitchen table with his go-bag, just in case. The second was that Silas sat Margaret down at that same kitchen table and told her everything. He told her about the phone call from Eli, a retired ATF agent who now worked private security and who had been keeping an eye on the Whitlock family for almost a decade on Silas's behalf because Silas never fully trusted the mayor. He told her that Eli had traced the 2 Escalades to a private security firm registered in Wyoming, which was owned by a shell company, which was owned by another shell company, which eventually traced back to, among other people, Harlan Whitlock's campaign finance director. He told her that the Glock under the counter had been traced using a separate channel to a burglary in Idaho 18 months ago. He told her that Chad Whitlock had been photographed 2 months before Amos Sutherland died entering and leaving a motel room in Livingston, Montana that had been rented under the name Theodore Finch, the same name on the Stockman's bank safe deposit box. Margaret stared at him. Amos wrote that name in the letter Silas. He wrote Theodore Finch. I know. Chad Whitlock was using that name. I know. Then Amos was watching him. Amos knew it was him, all the way back to 2019, before he ever retired. I think Amos knew Maggie. I think he knew who killed those 4 women. I think he's known for 6 years. And I think he spent the last 6 years of his life building a file quietly without telling you or anyone else, so that when the moment came when Chad Whitlock made one mistake, he could put him away. But they got to Amos first. Somebody told them, Silas said. Somebody who worked with him. Somebody who knew what he was building. The fire in the wood stove crackled. Outside, a coyote yipped somewhere up on the ridge. Margaret stared at her hands. Walt, she whispered. Walt, Silas agreed. At 9:14 p.m., Silas's phone, the satellite one, the one he only pulled out at the ridge, buzzed. It was Eli. Silas took the call in the dark, standing at the top of the trail. Talk to me. Kovac just called you back. I saw. I haven't returned it. Don't, not yet. He's not alone. I've got eyes on him. He's in the parking lot of the Iron Skillet Diner, in the passenger seat of one of the Escalades, talking to the driver, pointing at a map. Silas closed his eyes for a second. You sure? I'm sure, Si. I took the picture myself from the roof of the hardware store. I'll send it. The photo came through 40 seconds later. Grainy night vision, but clear enough. Walt Kovac, in the passenger seat, leaning toward the driver, one finger on a map. Silas looked at the photo for a long time. Then he typed a message back to Eli. I want to go get Kovac tonight, face to face. Me, Bear, and Gideon. You got eyes you can loan me. 3 dots. I got eyes where you want to do this. Somewhere Maggie doesn't have to see it. Somewhere a man can speak honestly. The old Sutherland place. 4127 Willow Creek Road. Amos's house. It's empty. She hasn't sold it yet. A pause. Ballsy sigh. Ballsy and right. He won't expect that. Make the call. Tell Walt I want to meet. Midnight. Alone. Tell him I know about the cameras. Tell him I want to hear it from his own mouth before I decide what happens to him. He'll come armed. Good. I'd be disappointed if he didn't. Silas pocketed the phone, looked up at the stars. More stars than a city boy could dream of. The Milky Way smeared across the Montana sky like somebody had spilled salt on black velvet. 40 years of friendship. 40 years. Silas Mercer walked back down the trail toward the cabin, toward a 71-year-old widow he'd sworn to protect, toward the 2 brothers waiting with their bikes in the pines. He had a meeting to make. And somewhere in a black Escalade parked outside a small-town diner, a man named Walt Kovac was looking at his phone, reading a text from Silas Mercer, feeling for the first time in 40 years the cold finger of consequence tap him on the shoulder. The Sutherland house was a modest 1-story on 2 acres of land set back from Willow Creek Road behind a windbreak of pines. Amos had built the back porch himself in 1997. There was still a pair of his work boots by the kitchen door. Silas arrived at 11:47 p.m. Bear and Gideon parked their bikes 100 yards down the road, killed the engines, walked in quiet. Silas let himself in with the key Margaret had given him. He turned on one lamp in the living room, sat down in Amos's old leather chair, waited. At 11:58 p.m., a pair of headlights came down the driveway. Slow, careful. Walter Kovac got out of his truck, alone. He walked up to the front door, knocked once, came in when Silas called out. He stood in the doorway of the living room. His Stetson was in his hands. Silas. Walt, you gonna shoot me? Depends on what comes out of your mouth in the next 5 minutes. Walt nodded, took a slow breath, walked over to the couch opposite Silas, sat down heavily. He looked old, older than he'd looked that morning, like he'd aged 10 years in 14 hours. I figured you'd see the cameras sooner or later, Walt said. I saw them. I know you did. Tell me why, brother. Just tell me why. Walt stared at his hat in his hands. My granddaughter, he said, Emma, she's 24, got arrested in Bozeman in 2019 for trafficking oxycodone, possession with intent, 11-year sentence minimum. She was going to do the full stretch, Silas. My whole family was going to watch that little girl die in a cage. So you made a deal. Harlan Whitlock's people came to me 3 days after she got booked. They said, Walt, your granddaughter's case is going to get reassigned to a different prosecutor. Evidence is going to get lost. She's going to do 18 months in minimum and walk out with her life. All you got to do is tell us what the old detective is working on. Amos, and you did. Walt's voice cracked. I told them what he was working on. I told them about the 4 women. I told them he was close. And then 8 months later, Amos had a stroke. Amos did not have a stroke, Walt. I know he didn't. Silence. Walt finally looked up, and his face was wet. I didn't know they were going to kill him, Silas. I swear to Christ and my mother and everything I ever loved. I thought they were going to pay him off. Move him out of the state, something. Not that, never that. But once he was dead, you kept going. Yeah. You watched my shop. You photographed my ledger. When Maggie finally showed up today, you made sure the right people knew. Walt didn't answer. He just nodded. Once. Silas stood up from Amos's leather chair, walked over to the couch, put a hand on Walt Kovac's shoulder. He did not hit him. He did not shoot him. He just stood there for a long moment with his hand on the shoulder of the man who had been his brother for 40 years and who had betrayed the man they had both loved. Walt, he said quietly, you are going to do one more thing for me. And if you do it, I will not tell Maggie what you just told me. She does not need to carry this on top of everything else. Do you understand me? What do you want me to do? You're going to sit in front of an FBI tape recorder tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., and you're going to tell them everything. Names, dates, the deal with Chad, the plan for Maggie, the whole thing. They'll put me away for the rest of my life, Silas. You're 73 years old, Walt. The rest of your life isn't that long. And it's a price you owe. Walter Kovac sat on Ambrose Sutherland's couch, and he cried like a child. And outside, down the road, Bear and Gideon Rook stood beside their bikes in the cold and did not say a word because they knew what was happening inside that house was between 2 old men and the ghosts of 40 years. At 12:41 a.m., Silas Mercer walked out of Ambrose Sutherland's house with a verbal confession and a commitment. He had won. Not completely, not yet, but enough. Tomorrow morning, Walt Kovac would sit across from an FBI agent and tear down a United States Senate campaign. The 2 Escalades at the diner would be arrested on federal conspiracy charges within 48 hours. Chad Whitlock would be hunted. Mayor Harlan Whitlock would watch his career burn. It felt good. It felt for the first time in 3 days, actually, for the first time in 10 weeks, since the phone call that told him Amos was dead, like the world might be the right shape again. Silas rode back to the cabin with Bear and Gideon flanking him. The Harleys purred through the October dark. His breath came out in little clouds. He was tired. He was, for one foolish moment, relieved. That was his mistake. Because when he pulled up to the cabin at 1:34 a.m., he saw the front door standing open. He saw Doc, his combat medic, slumped against the porch railing with a hand pressed to a bleeding head wound. He saw Margaret's wooden box empty lying on its side in the dirt of the driveway. And he saw Doc's shaking finger pointing down the trail in the direction of the ridge. They took her, Silas. Doc's voice was thick with blood. 2 men, not the diner crew, somebody else. They came up the back trail. They knew where the cabin was. They knew the layout. They knew everything. Silas felt the ground shift under his boots. Doc, look at me. Who took her? I didn't see the driver, but I saw the one who pistol whipped me. I saw his face sigh. Who? Doc spit blood into the dirt. It was the kid Cy, the rich one, the one who called her a bitch this morning. He had a partner with him, big man, military cut, but the kid was the one who grabbed her. And Doc grabbed Silas's wrist with a bloody hand. He was smiling. Silas Mercer stood on the porch of his cabin in the Montana night, looking down at the empty wooden box in the dirt, and felt something inside him that he had not felt since Kuwait City in 1991. It was not rage. Rage was too small a word. It was a cold, patient, absolute clarity. Somewhere in the dark, Chad Whitlock had Margaret Sutherland. Somewhere in the dark, the clock on this whole long story had just dropped from 48 hours to something much, much shorter. And somewhere in the dark, a man named Silas Mercer, 68 years old, Gulf War Marine president of the Rocky Mountain chapter, closed his eyes once and then opened them and began to walk to his truck. He did not run. Men like Silas Mercer do not run. They arrive. Silas Mercer did not speak for the first 7 miles. The F-250 bounced down the dirt road, headlights cutting through the Montana dark. Bear in the passenger seat with a pump shotgun across his knees. Gideon Rook in the back, checking the action on a Ruger Point .357. Doc had stayed at the cabin. He had refused to go to a hospital. He had cleaned his own head wound in the kitchen sink, applied butterfly sutures from his go bag with a hand that did not shake, and said two things before Silas left. "I'm sorry, brother." They came up the ridge. "I didn't hear him till it was too late." And the kid wasn't alone, Silas. His partner called him Theo, not Chad, Theo, Theodore Finch. The name on the safe deposit box. The name Chad Whitlock had been using in Livingston, Montana 2 months before Ambrose Sutherland died. Silas rolled that name around in his head as he drove. Theodore Finch. It was a name Chad had chosen for himself. A name with a history, a name with meaning. He pulled his satellite phone from the console. "Eli, tell me everything you can find on the name Theodore Finch. Not the bank account, the person. Go back 30 years. "On it." Silas hung up. Mile 8, Bear finally spoke. "Si, where are we going?" "Back into town, quiet. No bikes, we're in the truck." Chad grew up in Ironwood. If he wanted to hide somewhere, he knows somewhere his daddy doesn't know about. He's got exactly 3 places to pick from. "You know those places?" "I've known Chad Whitlock since the day his mama brought him home from the hospital." "Yeah, I know those places." Gideon leaned forward between the seats. "Silas, question. If the mayor doesn't know, truly doesn't know what his son is, then the mayor is the only person in this whole thing who might be on our side tonight. You thought about that?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. "I thought about it," he said, "but we can't risk it yet. Not until Maggie's breathing." At mile 14, the satellite phone buzzed. "Eli." Silas put him on speaker. "Theodore Finch," Eli said. "Born 1971. Died 1993 in a single car accident outside Great Falls, Montana. Age 22. Family moved to Ironwood in 1978. Went to Ironwood High." "Did he know the Whitlocks?" "Si, he was Harlan Whitlock's best friend. Groomsman at his wedding. Godfather to his son." The cab of the truck went silent. "Chad is using his dead godfather's name as an alias." "Yeah. Jesus Christ." "There's more. Finch's parents still live in Ironwood. Gerald and Eileen Finch, both in their late 80s. Eileen has dementia. Gerald is her caretaker. They live on the north side of town at the end of Finch Road. It's where the road gets its name." Silas slowed the truck, turned his head to Bear. "Finch Road. He's at the Finch house." Bear nodded slowly. "Old people. Dementia. Nobody's looking for him there. Kid's got cold hands." "Cold hands," Silas agreed. "And smart, which means we need to be smarter." He pressed down on the accelerator. Finch Road was a narrow lane at the north edge of Ironwood, bordered on one side by a cattle fence and on the other by a drainage ditch full of fall leaves. The Finch house sat at the very end, a small white clapboard, a detached garage, a porch light that had been on for decades. Silas killed the F250's headlights a quarter-mile out, coasted the last 200 yards in neutral, parked behind a thick stand of cottonwoods. It was 2:49 a.m. They moved on foot. Bear took the back of the property. Gideon took the side. Silas took the front. Through the kitchen window, a single lamp burned. Silas crept up to the window low and looked in. What he saw broke his heart in a way the rest of the night had not. At the kitchen table sat Gerald Finch, 87 years old, in his pajamas, his thin silver hair uncombed, his hands tied behind his back with a length of clothesline, a strip of duct tape across his mouth. Across from him, in a chair turned sideways, sat Margaret Sutherland. Also tied, not gagged. Her gray bun had come loose and silver hair spilled across her shoulders. She was talking quietly, steadily to Gerald. She was comforting him. 71 years old, kidnapped, tied to a chair, and she was comforting the old man across from her. In a corner of the kitchen, his back to the window, a big man in a dark jacket was on his phone. Military cut, shoulder holster visible under the jacket. Chad's partner. The man who had pistol-whipped Doc. Chad Whitlock was not in the kitchen. Silas moved slow and silent around to the side of the house and found a second lit window. The living room. Chad was in the living room. He was sitting on a floral print couch with his feet up on a coffee table. He had a drink in his hand, bourbon from a bottle he had clearly helped himself to. On the coffee table next to his feet was a closed laptop and Margaret's empty wooden box. He was watching something on his phone. He was smiling. Silas pulled back from the window, exhaled once. Slowly, he pressed his throat mic. "Bear, Gideon, listen to me. There are 2 hostages, Margaret and an 87-year-old man named Gerald Finch. Kitchen. They are alive. There is 1 tango in the kitchen, armed big man. There is a second tango in the living room, Chad armed status unknown, probably yes, and he's drunk or working on it. Now hear me. We do not go in loud. We do not put rounds in a house where 2 old people are tied up. We go in smart. We take the kitchen tango first. Quiet. Bear, you're on him. Gideon, you're on Chad. I'll get the hostages. 2 clicks on the radio. Acknowledgement. On my mark. Silas moved around to the back door. He waited until the man in the kitchen turned his back to the stove phone still to his ear. Go. What happened next took 11 seconds. Bear came in through the back door like a ghost. He was 62 years old and 6'4" and 260 pounds of old-school enforcer. He had his shotgun reverse stock first, and he caught the military cut man in the base of the skull before the man even registered the sound of the door. The man dropped. The phone clattered. Bear kicked the phone across the floor and dropped a knee on the man's back. Margaret's head whipped around. She saw Bear. Then she saw Silas stepping through the door behind him. She did not scream. She did not cry out. She did exactly what Ambrose Sutherland had spent 46 years teaching her to do. In a crisis, she stayed calm and useful. The old man first, she whispered urgently. Please, Silas. Gerald first. He's had a heart thing. He needs his pills. Silas cut her loose with his pocket knife in 4 seconds. Then he cut Gerald loose. The old man's hands were purple. Silas rubbed his wrists, peeled the tape off his mouth gently. Mr. Finch, sir, you're safe. My name is Silas Mercer. You've known me a long time. I'm going to get you to a hospital. Just breathe. Just breathe. Gerald Finch blinked at him with watery eyes. Recognition came slowly, then tears. Silas, the boy, Chad, he said he was Theo. He said Theo was home. I know, sir. I know. At that moment from the living room came a crash, glass shattering, then a single loud thump. Then Gideon O'Rourke's voice flat and unhurried over the radio. Living room secure, subject on the floor. He swung at me with a bourbon bottle. He shouldn't have done that. Silas let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He looked at Margaret. She looked back at him. And then Margaret Sutherland, 71 years old, still tied at the ankles, did something she had not done in 35 years. She reached into the pocket of her gray wool coat, and she pulled out a Colt 1911 pistol. It was old, worn. The grip was checkered walnut darkened by decades of hand oil. The barrel was blued. Silas recognized it immediately. It had been Amos Sutherland's sidearm for every day of his 28 years on the Ironwood police force. Maggie, Silas said slowly, how long have you had that? Since we left the shop. I put it in my coat when you went to the safe. I'm sorry, Silas. I should have told you. But I promised Amos a long time ago that if it ever came down to it, I would be the one holding his gun. Silas stared at her. Then he knelt down and cut the rope around her ankles. Maggie, he said, next time tell me. Next time, he helped her to her feet. She was steady. Gideon brought Chad into the kitchen on his knees. The rich boy was bleeding from a cut above his eye where the bourbon bottle had connected the wrong way with the only thing he'd hit with it, which was the edge of the coffee table. Gideon had not touched him. Chad had managed the injury all by himself. But he was not afraid. That was the thing that struck Silas. That was the thing he would remember for the rest of his life. Chad Whitlock was kneeling on a linoleum kitchen floor in a dead man's house at 3:02 a.m. with his wrists zip-tied behind his back and blood running into his eye, and he was smiling. Uncle Silas, he said. Silas didn't answer. You really don't know, do you? Silas crouched down in front of him, eye level. He said nothing. My father has no idea, Uncle Silas. Zero. He never has. He's a dumb, vain, preening politician, and he thinks his son is running his Montana campaign office. He doesn't know I hired Eli Kovac's kidnapper friends. He doesn't know I paid Walt. He doesn't know I was in that motel with Lucinda Brevard in 2016. He doesn't know. Everyone's been so sure he was behind this. But he's just a man with a weak son he can't look at directly. Chad laughed, blood on his teeth. And I'll tell you something else. My father is going to stand up in front of every news camera in this state tomorrow morning, and he's going to give the speech of his life, and he is going to win this Senate seat because I am not going to testify. I am going to take a plea. I am going to say I acted alone. I am going to go to prison for 25 years and come out at 55. And my father will have 18 years in the United States Senate to make sure I never spend another night in a cage after that. He leaned forward. His voice dropped. So here's what you're going to do, Uncle Silas. You're going to let me walk out of this kitchen. Because if you don't, Margaret's daughter Delphine, who lives in Bozeman at 412 Briarwood Lane and who drives a silver Subaru Outback, she is going to have a very bad week. I have friends. I have resources. I am 20 years younger than you, old man. I can wait. I can wait a long time. Silas stared at him. Margaret Sutherland, standing behind Silas with her husband's Colt held down at her side, made a small sound. It was not a sob. It was something else. Something older and colder. It was the sound a mother makes when someone threatens her child. Silas stood up slowly, turned to her. Maggie, go sit with Mr. Finch. Please. Silas, please, Ryan. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked slowly to the old man at the table and sat down beside him and took his thin, shaking hand in hers. Silas turned back to Chad. Son, he said, you just made two mistakes. Yeah. The first was naming her daughter out loud, because now I have witnesses to a threat on a woman's life. My brothers. Mr. Finch, Maggie. That is a federal crime in this country. Kidnapping and a threat across state lines. That is 20 years on top of everything else all by itself. Chad's smile faltered for half a second. The second mistake you made, Silas said, is that you think your daddy doesn't know what you are. He doesn't. He does. He doesn't. Son, I have known Harlan Whitlock for 39 years. I watched him hold you in his arms on the day you were born. I watched him coach your little league team. I watched him shake your hand at your high school graduation. I watched him 3 years ago at a Chamber of Commerce dinner break, down crying in my truck in the parking lot because he said, and I quote Silas, I think there is something wrong with my son, and I don't know what to do about it, and I am too big a coward to find out. Chad's mouth opened, then closed. He knows, son. He has known. He has been a coward about it, and that is a sin he will answer for in his own time. But he knows, and when I hand him a tape recording of what you just said in this kitchen, a recording my friend Gideon is making on his phone right now from 4 feet behind you, your father is going to have a choice to make, and I believe in my heart, after 40 years of knowing the man, that he is going to make the right one. Chad turned his head. Gideon Rook, standing behind him, held up a phone. The screen showed a recording app. Running, timer reading 000417. Chad Whitlock went for the first time that night, truly, completely, visibly pale. You can't, he whispered. He won't. He's a politician. He's not going to throw away a Senate seat for me. He's a father-son. Before he's a politician. You forgot that. Silas turned, looked at Bear. Call Sheriff Dorsey. The real one. Not any of Walt's old friends. Tell him we have a hostage rescue and a confession at the Finch place. Tell him to bring an ambulance for Mr. Finch and a paddy wagon for these two. And Bear. Yes, Tell him to wake up the mayor. The sun came up over Ironwood at 7:22 a.m. on Wednesday morning. By then, Gerald Finch had been taken by ambulance to Bozeman Deaconess Hospital, where he was listed in stable condition and where his daughter, called from Spokane in the middle of the night, was already on a plane to meet him. Eileen Finch, his wife with dementia, had slept through the entire night upstairs and never knew her house had been invaded. And a kindly nurse from the hospital was now sitting at her bedside, playing cribbage with her and making her laugh. The military cut man in the kitchen had been identified as one Randall Keene, a former Army Ranger turned private contractor from Casper, Wyoming. He was in federal custody. Walter Kovac, at 6:45 a.m., had walked into the Billings field office of the FBI with Silas's friend Hank and had begun a formal statement that would eventually run to 131 pages. Chad Whitlock was in a holding cell in Bozeman, and at 8:14 a.m. in a 2-story brick house on Elm Street, the mayoral residence of Ironwood, Montana, a 58-year-old man named Harlan Whitlock sat at his kitchen table in a bathrobe, staring at a phone recording that an FBI agent had just played for him. The recording was 4 minutes and 17 seconds long. When it ended, Harlan Whitlock did not speak for a very long time. Then he stood up. He walked to the window. He looked out at the bird feeder his wife Pauline, dead of cancer 4 years now, had hung from the elm tree in 2001. And he said very quietly, "My boy killed those women." "Yes, sir," the agent said, "and he arranged the death of Detective Sutherland." "We believe so, yes, sir. And he tried to kill Mrs. Sutherland last night." "Yes, sir." Harlan Whitlock put his hand on the cold window pane. And Silas Mercer, who had been standing in the kitchen doorway the whole time, who the agent had let in 5 minutes earlier against protocol, because some moments are not about protocol, spoke soon. "Harlan," the mayor did not turn around. "Silas, do you remember what you said to me in my truck 3 years ago, in the parking lot of the chamber dinner?" The mayor's shoulders began to shake. "I remember. You said you were too big a coward to find out. You said those exact words to me, brother." "I did. You aren't anymore." Harlan Whitlock turned around. His face was wet. He looked at the FBI agent. Then he looked at Silas. Then he looked at the phone on the table. And the mayor of Ironwood, Montana, the man who was supposed to give the speech of his life in front of every news camera in the state in 4 hours and 46 minutes, walked to the phone, picked it up, and called his campaign manager. "Denise," he said, "cancel the event, all of it. I am going to hold a press conference on the steps of Ironwood City Hall at noon today. I am withdrawing from the race. I will be taking questions, and I will be telling the truth." He hung up. He sat down heavily in a kitchen chair, and the mayor of Ironwood put his face in his hands and wept for the son he had been too afraid to confront, and for the 4 women his son had killed because of it, and for the husband of Margaret Sutherland, and for a country that he suddenly understood he had failed in a small way by his own cowardice. Silas Mercer crossed the kitchen. He put one hand on the mayor's shoulder. He did not say anything at all. There was nothing left to say. At 12:04 p.m. on Wednesday, October 16, 2024, on the front steps of the Ironwood City Hall, Mayor Harlan Whitlock stood behind a podium in front of 16 news cameras and 41 reporters and said the following. "My name is Harlan Whitlock. I am the mayor of Ironwood, Montana. This morning, I am withdrawing from the United States Senate race effective immediately. My son, Chad Whitlock, has been arrested on charges of kidnapping conspiracy and 4 counts of murder in the first degree relating to the deaths of 4 women in our community between 2016 and 2019. I want to name them now: Lucinda Brevard, Paula Holbrook, Darlene McAdoo, Rosalind Tisdale. They were our neighbors. They were our friends. They deserved better from this town, and they deserved better from me. To their families, I say there is nothing I can offer you that will bring them back. There is only the truth. The truth is that a detective named Ambrose Sutherland knew what my son had done, and he was killed for knowing. The truth is that I, as his father, suspected something was wrong with my son, and I did not act. The truth is that my cowardice contributed to the suffering of this community. I will spend the rest of my life trying to answer for it. I will not be taking questions." He stepped away from the podium. He walked down the steps of the city hall. He walked to a black sedan, not his, an FBI sedan, and he got into the back seat. And Harlan Whitlock, who had been a small-town mayor for 12 years and who would never hold public office again, was driven to Billings to give a 6-hour statement about what he had known and when he had known it and why he had not acted sooner. 8 blocks away at Mercer's Arms and Ammunition, Silas Mercer watched the press conference on a little television he kept on the counter for slow afternoons. Margaret Sutherland sat beside him on a folding chair, a cup of tea in her hands. Ricky Abernathy stood on her other side and had not left her side in 18 hours. When the mayor named Amos Margaret began to cry quietly with dignity, the way a woman cries when her husband has finally been given his due, Silas put his arm around her. He did not say anything. There was nothing left to say. By the middle of December, the snow had come to Ironwood. Chad Whitlock pleaded guilty in federal court to avoid the death penalty. He received 6 consecutive life sentences. He will die in a federal penitentiary in Colorado. Walter Kovac received 12 years in federal prison for obstruction of justice conspiracy and accessory after the fact. He was 73 years old. He did not contest the sentence. At his sentencing hearing, he asked for only one thing: that he be allowed to send a single letter to Margaret Sutherland. The judge granted it. Margaret never opened the letter. She did not throw it away either. She put it sealed in the bottom drawer of her husband's old desk. Someday she thought she might read it, or someday one of her children might, or someday none of them would, and that would be all right too. Randall Keene took a plea deal and testified against the security firm that had employed him. 7 other men went down with him. A small, quiet federal indictment unsealed in late November named the Whitlock campaign finance director the man who had funneled money from the firm, along with 6 others. All convicted. All gone. Harlan Whitlock sold his house on Elm Street. He moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in Bozeman. He enrolled at 58 in a paralegal certification program. When asked by an old friend why, he said, "I spent 12 years helping people get into trouble. I'd like to spend the next 12 helping people get out of it, especially people who don't have money." He wrote a letter to every one of the 4 victims' families. Long letters, handwritten. He did not ask for their forgiveness. He only told them the truth about who their daughters and sisters had been and what his son had done and what he, Harlan, had failed to do. 2 of the families never answered. 1 family sent the letter back. The 4th family, Darlene McAdoo's mother, a 74-year-old widow named Inez, wrote him back a 2-line note. "Mr. Whitlock, thank you for the truth. I forgive you. I will not tell you it gets better because it does not, but it gets quieter. Inez McAdoo." Harlan Whitlock framed that note. He kept it on his desk for the rest of his life. On the first Saturday in December, the town of Ironwood held a memorial service in the town square. It was Margaret Sutherland's idea. She had spent 3 weeks planning it with the mayor's temporary replacement, a kind woman named Evelyn Torrance, and with the families of the 4 victims. 4 oak trees were planted in the square, 1 for each woman. A small bronze plaque was set into the ground in front of the trees. It read Lucinda Brevard, Paula Holbrook, Darlene McAdoo, Rosalind Tisdale. We remember, we refused to look away. 240 people came, nearly the whole town. Margaret Sutherland stood at the front in a new black coat, a small framed photograph of her husband in her hands. She spoke for 9 minutes. She did not talk about Chad Whitlock. She did not talk about Walt Kovac. She talked instead about her husband, about the 28 years he had spent on the Ironwood police force, about the way he had kept a small notebook on his bedside table and written down every night the names of the people he had helped that day, about the way he had taught her 30 years ago to shoot a Colt 1911 because he had said, "Maggie, the world is mostly good, but on the day it isn't, I want you to be ready." About the fact that he had been right about both halves of that sentence. And at the end, she said this: "My husband was a police officer. The man standing beside me today, Silas Mercer, is a biker. For most of my life, I was told those were two different kinds of men. I want to tell you today in front of God in this town that they are not. There is only one kind of man in this world that matters. The kind who stands up. The kind who does not look away. My husband was that man. Silas Mercer is that man. Ricky Abernathy, the young man who stood in a gun shop 3 months ago and refused to stay quiet when cruelty walked in, is that man. I am 71 years old. I have buried a husband. I have been kidnapped. I have held a gun in my hand, and I have been prepared to use it. I hope I never do those things again. But I want you to know, all of you young and old in this square today, that the world will ask you more than once in your life to stand up. And when it does, you have a choice. You can be a Walter Kovac, or you can be an Ambrose Sutherland. I pray that you choose the harder road. I pray that you are surprised by your own courage. Thank you." She stepped back from the microphone. Silas Mercer, in a black suit he had not worn since his wife Clara's funeral in 2011, stepped forward and put the Purple Heart that Margaret had given him that morning, her husband's from the Beirut barracks bombing in 1983, where Amos had served as a young Marine before becoming a policeman, onto the small plaque beneath the trees. He stepped back. He took Margaret's hand. And the town of Ironwood stood in the cold December air and was quiet and remembered. 6 months later, May. The snow was gone. The cottonwoods along the Yellowstone River were greening up. Silas Mercer sat on the back porch of his small house outside Ironwood, a cup of coffee in his hand, and watched the sun come up over the Absaroka Range. The screen door opened. Margaret Sutherland came out wrapped in a flannel shirt that used to be Amos's. She had moved to a small rental cottage 3 miles from Silas's place in March. She said the big house in the other end of town was too quiet. She said the memories were too loud. She said she wanted to be closer to her friends. She said it without meeting Silas's eyes, and he had said, "Fine, Maggie, whatever you need," without meeting hers either, and they had both known exactly what they were not saying. She sat down in the chair next to him now, put her own coffee cup on the railing. "Silas, do you think Amos would be proud?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Maggie, that man was proud of you every single day of his life. Tonight he's just louder about it." She smiled. Her eyes got wet. She did not let the tears fall. Far off down the gravel road, the sound of a motorcycle engine, then a second, then a third. Ricky Abernathy on his brand new Sportster, Bear on his old Road King, Gideon Rook on the custom chopper he had been building in his garage for 11 years. They were coming out for coffee. It was a Saturday tradition now. Had been since March. Ricky had been promoted to assistant manager at Mercer's Arms. He was taking night classes at the community college in Bozeman. He wanted to be a police officer someday, he had told Silas in April on the back porch, shyly like a boy confessing a secret. Silas had said, "Son, we need good ones. The world needs good ones. You'd be a good one." Ricky had cried, just a little. He hadn't thought Silas had noticed. Silas had pretended not to. The bikes pulled into the driveway. Silas stood up, stretched his back, took one last sip of coffee, and over the engines, over the Montana morning, over the sound of an old dog barking somewhere at a neighbor's house. The voiceover of this story, if it had a voiceover, and every story, like this one does, deep down, would have said something like this. Folks, there are 3 things in this life you don't mess with: a man's word, a mother's grief, and the last request of someone who has nothing left to lose. That Tuesday morning in Ironwood, Montana, 2 boys in a gun shop laughed at an old woman. They thought she was nothing. They thought she was weak. They thought the wooden box on her lap was the last gasp of a finished life. They were wrong about every single one of those things. She was the wife of a man who had spent 28 years standing up. She was the mother of two grown children who were still watching her, still learning from her, still taking their cues from her courage. She was the living memory of four women whose names this town had almost forgotten. And she was the reason a 68-year-old biker, a man who thought his best days were behind him, rode back into his own past one more time and set the record straight. That is what old age is for folks. It is not for quitting. It is not for fading. It is for showing up one more time when the world is finally ready to listen. For telling the truth in your own quiet voice until somebody hears it. For planting 4 oak trees in a town square and for standing next to them and for refusing to look away. That is the story of Margaret Sutherland. That is the story of Silas Mercer. And that, God willing, is the story we are all still writing. For every Ambrose Sutherland who never came home, and for every Maggie who kept the light on. The bikes pulled up. Margaret Sutherland stood and waved and smiled, and the screen, if this were a screen, would fade to black.